Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The time is now 2 p.m. I call to order the meeting of the Orange County Sewer District Number 1 Advisory Committee for May 21st, 2024. Copy of the agenda for this meeting may be found on the county website under the tab for the legislature. Please silence your phones and electronic devices, and at this time, please rise and join me for the pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Kelly, can you do a roll call?
Yes. Emma? Here. Alex? Present. Jeannie?
Here.
Ellers?
Here.
Hotel? Here.
Here. Okay, first up, we have, Rick is out today. Joe Mahoney will be here shortly. We have Eric Denengi, Commissioner of the Department of Public Works. We have Robert Gray, Deputy Commissioner, EF&S, and Mary Beth Bianconi, Partner, Delaware Engineering, DPC. Thank you. And item number 1A is variance update. Anything on the variance? I know.
Yeah, so this is related, and there should be nothing, hopefully. If not, I've got one. Do you guys want me to jump in?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So variance update. So folks may recall that as part of the variance process, the county, just like with mercury minimization, the county will be required to have a total dissolved solids minimization plan. You may remember that we had submitted a total dissolved solids minimization plan to the DEC back several months ago. And the DEC provided us with comments. We had a follow-up technical call with them, with staff. That was very helpful in us understanding better what DEC was looking for in the revisions to that document. So the document I just handed you is the revised document that was submitted about a week and a half ago to DEC in conformance with their comments. This is the text of that document. It does not include the appendices. If you would like to see the appendices, please let us know or let staff know. They have copies of all the appendices if you want to see them, but it's all information you have seen before. So there's nothing new. On this, the only thing that I will go over, this one's going to be the short agenda item, is on page 17, you'll find a very pretty pie chart. You remember last time we talked about this, this was something that DEC wanted to have be part of this document. And we spent some time figuring out how we could represent the information in pie chart format to make it a little bit more understandable for folks. So this actually, what's nice about this is in one sheet of paper, you can really understand the current situation, what the mitigation might target and what could be done about it all in one sheet of paper. So what's interesting about this is that you see a good chunk of the pie chart are these two the darker blue and the darker orange colors. And then the smaller part is the lighter blue, the lighter orange, and that little tiny sliver of red. Visually, this is important because the two darker colors represent the part of total dissolved solids and chlorides that are the background condition. That's the part we can't, Mother Nature put it there and there's nothing we can do about it, is what it is. The smaller part of the pie, the lighter colors and the red represent the part that is something that we could potentially conduct mitigation strategies to have there be a net environmental benefit in terms of reducing the amount of TDS and chloride in that section. So when you look at that, that adds up to around, I'm just going to for round numbers, say about 40% of the load is something that we could work towards. And then you'll see down in the table on the same page that we've listed 5 different areas to approach to address those lighter shades. Water treatment chemicals at the wastewater treatment plant itself, which we know because of the type of chemicals, they do add total dissolved solids and chlorides. So we have some action items that could be accomplished there. A footnote here is we're always going to use chemistry in our treatment process. That's how treatment processes work. So this is never going to be a zero. It's always going to be something, but can we improve it? Possibly. So that's the concept. Commercial industrial properties, they're those teeny tiny little 0.2%. And by the way, industries was supposed to, that typo was supposed to be corrected and it wasn't. Where it says SIU industries and industries spelled wrong, fix that. It's a typo. But again, these are a very small proportion of the, load. And we've listed some strategies here. Again, this is one of those, even if we were to eliminate their contribution entirely, it's such a small part of the load that it wouldn't make a substantive difference. It would make a difference, but it's not, a silver bullet. Road salt and de-icing operations are a piece of this. As we discussed before, it's hard to understand what piece of this and to get really good data on this, but we know they're a piece of this, so there's some strategies listed there. Residential water softening is also a piece of this, and that's another area where there may be able to be some effect to be had in working with on the supply side, with water suppliers and working with residents there. And then supply side water softening is that last one, as I just mentioned. So that this is kind of a really nice summary, but I just wanted you all to have the results of the work on this. DEC did receive this, like I say, about a week and a half ago. And we would expect to hear back from them hopefully within the next several weeks. We may do what we did before, which is reach out to them and say, do you have any, you want to have a call? Do you have any follow-up questions? Those kinds of things to keep that dialogue going. But does anyone have any questions on the TDS?
Yes, Mary Beth. With these, are we going to begin to implement these strategies, the control strategies, or do we need to hear back from the DEC to say, we agree with these or disagree with these?
That's a great question. Actually, the county is already implementing a number of these and has been for the last several years because folks may remember we have a history where the original proposal to modify the speed use permit for Harriman was in 2010. So this has been a long ramp to here. So the county is already implementing a number of these strategies, particularly with respect to what the county's been doing with their use of road salt, among other things. They're tracking the use of chemicals at the treatment plant. So really, there's already a lot of work that's been done. All of that data gathering that we did in preparing the variance actually feeds into this because you have to have what's your baseline condition and where you're trying to go. So the county's already engaged in this, and in fact, DEC has encouraged the county to not wait for an approval, but to engage in all of the activities that are reasonable to do so at this time to, again, kind of get ahead of this process as much as possible. So that's a great question, Chairman.
And with regard to the residential water softening, are we already in a process of providing materials regarding efficient?
I don't believe we are yet. I think that that's a future implementation. And that has to do with old water softeners are timer based. And so there's a chance that they're discharging a lot more chloride than is necessary, rather than being more closely honed into what's needed to soften the water. So I think that that's one of our future steps going down the road.
And who would be in charge of putting out the materials and the information? Is that your company or is that?
Well, so it would be, we'll call it the county, right? In some fashion. And then I think what has to be determined with each of these pieces, with many of these, you're already doing things that you already have staff who are dedicated to doing a number of these tasks. So it's really going to be, while you're doing this, you're going to spend 5 more minutes doing something else.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a big burden, but there are a few of these. The public education campaign is new. So I think we'll have to figure out, the county will have to figure out how to implement that. The reality is, the good news is, there's a lot of pre-existing information that can be utilized to do public information campaigns. So you're not starting from ground zero, you're not creating a whole host of new information. There's a lot available.
I think it would be a good idea to get together with the county exec's office to try to have some type of public notification on the website, so they could click on it and maybe have some quick facts about water softeners. And again, that just goes towards the showing the effort that the committee is taking to move everything forward, so that everything gets a sum of the total. Hold on one second, I have the chairwoman first, then Michael.
Has any thought been given, and is there any benefit to talking to the water authority as far as the education component is concerned?
Yeah, I'll take that as on the water authority.
I figured.
And the water authority does do quite a bit of educational
Yes, they
outreach
do.
in general, and I think that is going to be a great avenue to do that. We just haven't gotten to the point about, how we want to get this out. But it is certainly something that we can discuss at that level to make sure it's incorporated into the educational agenda. And then sort of take credit for that in a way also for, what we need to show the DEC. But it's a great point, and I think it's something.
Another thing too is with that is that Water Authority just had a successful start to the year right now, and waiting to close on some of the projects. And as we move forward, we're kind of at the stage now where we've used the grant money, and within days, we're going to be using it, so that we're looking at other projects and things that we can do. So hopefully we can find something to do there. They also have their newsletter, which is very, very informative. So Eric, maybe we can get a write-up and put it in the Water Authority newsletter. And then also along with we can put on the website and kind of have it so it's the same message and.
Right, and we will have to have a bit of a more targeted audience when we're talking about the sewer district versus what the Water Authority as a broad spectrum sends information out. A lot of times towards younger, or younger citizens in the schools, but certainly I think Pete and I both being on the Water Authority, we can work together and figure out how that can be a good platform to get some of the.
Yeah, that's a great point that it's not the whole county wide.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how we can separate it.
You probably get the municipalities involved too.
Yes.
Okay.
Like the municipalities
Yep,
directly.
yeah, absolutely. They'll have the websites too, so.
Mhm. Social media is big,
Mhm.
creating, so normally with one of these kinds of things, these campaigns, we do a lot of, don't flush wipes campaigns, like a lot of don't flush wipes campaigns. So we would create sort of like a branding and marketing strategy. You create a logo, and you have a launch and and it sounds silly, but it actually works. It's why advertising to sell your cars and beer and everything on the planet works, is because that's the way you do it. So to be really effective, I think that's good, but you guys are touching on all of the right things. And I will say, kids are a great vehicle to get their parents to pay attention to things that they would otherwise not. We run into this with like fire safety drills and things like that. The kids are right on it, and they will torture mom and dad to get them to do the right thing. So kids are a good vehicle.
One other resource, I'm glad.
No, go ahead.
We talked about the road salt as well, so we do have an avenue through the Orange County Highway Superintendent Association, which I'm obviously very active with as well. So when we talk about road use, we're not necessarily just going to blast out to the public, right? We got to focus on the people who are actually spreading the salt on the roads, and just so some of that some practices that we already have in place, which we can share with local highway superintendents as well, like just tree clearing or tree trimming technique, let more sun hit the road, the way we monitor our salt usage, the way how we watch the weather, and you make sure you're not just dumping it down when it's going to rain before it snows, it's just going to wash off. There's all these different practices that we have in place that have shown to be very effective over the last, I want to say the numbers over the last 5 years or so, that shows how much less salt we've been buying. Obviously, weather has an effect on that sometimes too, right? We have a kind of a weak season, we don't use as much, but a lot of these practices we've been placing in effective. These are things we plan on sharing with some other municipalities.
Great. So, Michael?
I guess to Eric, probably all of you, but directly to, I mean, this is great. I like where it's going. From my days living in the world of quality assurance, I recommend maybe you think about, I'd like to see 2 more columns on the spreadsheet that says this is what we're doing, and this is what we have to do. Even if it's only for internal documents, so we can follow how we're working towards.
You go to the back. You get that. It's just on a different page. Yes, because there's a lot more information involved.
I mean, it's quite simple. Sometimes you get analysis, paralysis. Just
Yeah.
goes up. Questions, like, okay, do this, and this is what's gonna be done next month.
Yep.
Do this,
Tables.
because, you know, it's-
And that's
The
something,
management question is kind of.
that's also a tool that we're gonna have to show the DEC
Yeah.
what our progress is, and as Mary Beth, I think, alluded to the last meeting too, that this is all relevant to the variance
Sure.
request. Because if they're gonna give us this variance, we have to show that we're working to mitigate the things that they're potentially giving us variance.
Yeah.
So that's
I
an
appreciate
excellent-
that.
So tables 10 and 11 actually provide the information that you're asking for. And then what will
You
happen,
read my mind. How did you know?
they're frameworks now. And as we implement, they will be filled in with more granular detail. But yes, Mhm.
Because yeah, keep it simple.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you know, there's one thing you want to, you know, baffle them about this, but when you're doing things for the state, maybe you do it one. For our committee, keep it real simple. What are we doing? What's happening?
Yep, absolutely.
We don't keep asking the same questions. That'd be my recommendation. Okay, that's my question.
Now, Mary Beth, can they, would we be able, do you think, be able to reach the variance? I noticed on table 11, we go out to 2027 and we're still monitoring and reporting on potential TDS and all. Will we have to get to 2027 before we're compliant with the DEC or, you know, or before they could issue a variance, or can we get the variance and then continue this work and report?
The latter is the objective, just like with Mercury. So the other statewide water quality variance that exists is for Mercury. That variance has been around for several decades at this point. It's going to continue going long into the future. And it is a take actions, monitor. So this is patterned very much the same way. What DEC asked us to do was project out into the future a reasonable future of actions. So 5 years is a reasonable timeline to look at. When you get much past that, you know that there will be other variables upcoming. You might want to regroup, you might want to do different things. So this is a reasonable timeline, but the concept here is that, and the way that the variance is written and even the way that the species permit is written is that you will continue to take actions to work towards compliance. So, there may be in the future some, we've talked about this before, that a lot of the source of TDS and chloride, other than human activity, is coming from the natural geologic condition. So and in the drinking water. So if drinking water sources change to sources that start out with lower TDS and chloride, that can have a substantial positive impact on the amount of total dissolved and chloride in the Harriman effluent without doing anything else. The timing and the amount and all those kinds of things are yet to be determined, but that right there may be a substantial effort towards compliance with this.
Okay.
Sure.
Lois?
To the road salt. Do we use any treatment on our road salt? I know years ago, West Point started using a product, I can't remember the name of it, it was a derivative of the byproduct, creating byproduct.
Yeah, we add an additive sometimes when we know we're gonna get really cold temperatures that will help with that, but a lot of times we'll also add sand. But we don't use too many chemicals. We actually put down salt sometimes. We don't use a separate liquid brine. We will sometimes mix with sand and sometimes we will add an inducer to help with the colder temperatures. And then
So I thought that was, they were adding it, the product that they were adding at the time was to limit the effects, the road salt that they were using into their plants in the Hudson River, because a lot of their drains will drain right out, sort of into the Hudson. In fact, this is going back a number of years. So there was a product that reduced the contamination or contaminants within the salt to the water.
I'd have to check on that. I'm not familiar with it. I know there's,
Huh?
Calcium chloride?
No, it wasn't calcium chloride. They were using regular road salt. And what they would treat, a company would come in and basically turn it brown almost. And it was the chemical was a byproduct of creating and manufacturing vodka. And it reduced the effects of the road salt on the Hudson River and their plants. So I'd like us to think about that. And do we still, our report, I know we're not on the town board, but there was a consortium for buying road salt with the highway superintendents and stuff.
a lot of it comes off the state bid.
A lot of it can go state bid, okay, because there was like, I know that they, like, when I was on town board, our highway superintendent was meeting with, Woodbury and a couple others around here, we would get bulk deliveries that would get distributed.
Yeah, to get a better bang for your buck, yeah,
Yeah.
and- which is basically what the state bid does. I know that some counties also put their own bids out and they can make it piggybackable so the communities. can
Yeah, I
use
was
it.
wondering, because I know that that was talk back then of our county doing that and letting, municipalities buy it from us and it would be, even cheaper. So if we do that with the brine or whatever the substance is, that would be.
Yeah, and I think the state may have other bids out there as well on OGS
Okay,
for
and
other
then,
types of options.
talking about the education, Mary Beth, you hit on it with the kids. And I don't know that we should limit our audience to just our sewer district, because what we're doing will be beneficial to other municipalities and their water plants. And, we're getting the information, we're disseminating it. I don't think we should limit the audience
Good point. Let's
because
share it.
let's share it, let's put it out there to help everybody,
It's a regional issue. It's bigger than Orange County, it's bigger than.
Right.
So yes.
Exactly, so I'd say put out the full blast on that, and especially target the kids, because you're right. The kids come home and they're like, Mom, look at this, did you know that? And Daddy, did you see this? And, a kid might not know if they have a water softener in their house, but they're gonna ask their parents now.
Okay, good idea. Barry?
Just a caution on that, one thing we have to be careful of is, this is a district, this district is funded for the purposes within the district, and we shouldn't be using funds for purposes outside the district.
Right, but if the water authority is disseminating the
We- we-
information,
We shouldn't, the water authority shouldn't be doing it for the district. The water authority shouldn't be paying for information that's being disseminated. I think it should be a program of the,
can we turn
of
it
the
into
water
something?
authority. But-
Yeah,
and-
program
And
of
it's
the
very
water-
best at a regional thing, but we just need to be careful about whose
I
money we're using for
understand.
what.
Can we turn it into something for the county, something that comes out of maybe physical services? How would that,
Well, it would then need to be less it'd be more broadly focused and maybe not focused enough for DEC's liking within the district.
The good news is most of this communication is digital. So you're gonna pay once to create the digital copy. The district's gonna pay once to, where it goes after that, there's no additional cost. If Orange County's already sending a newsletter, if the Water Authority's already sending a newsletter for their own purposes, that copy is already created. So there isn't an extra cost because the vast majority of this information is digital. It's
But we,
so.
we also have to focus on what the recipients or the people we want to receive the information, where they get their information.
Sure.
So, and that may not be digital.
Gedalia, do you have a quick
Yes,
question?
if you don't mind,
Yeah.
appreciate it. Just a few points. We're talking here about voluntary compliance through education. You have to consider some sort of mandatory enforcement also. There's a very small pocket of people installing water softeners. They're called the plumbers. Just as you have electricians licensing process, there may have to be some sort of education directly to the plumbers that are installing these pieces. Because I see in Curious Joel, for example, they're privately marketing this. Your boiler is going to be ruined, and this is going to be ruined. Please call us. We're going to install softeners. It's like a direct push between the suppliers and the industry, the softeners with the customers, and no education is going to. Look, if you do education, the father explains to son, look, the boiler is going to be ruined if we don't have it, or this is going to be ruined. They're not going to rip out their softeners. There has to be some sort of focus. It's going to be a bit easier in Curious Joel after we get New York City water, because we're not going to need softeners at that time. But if you want to address softeners, it's between, you need to involve, since it's a drinking water product, you need to involve the county health people, and we need to involve some sort of either licensing or getting the message out there to the plumbers that softeners has a downside.
currently we don't.
Because there is a big financial incentive now to install it. And since wipes were mentioned, I'll just add that because I know from Anthony and from the staff that the sewer plant is suffering from wipes. I would suggest adding in the sewer ordinance a prohibition that on the stores of selling wipes that couldn't be used, that shouldn't be used. I'm not sure how, I know the county has a department dealing with businesses and what is permitted and what is prohibited. It's a different department. But I believe that stores shouldn't be selling wipes that are ruining all the sewer systems in the region. If there is a way to include that somewhere, somehow, whether it's tariffs or it's just simple prohibition or even encouraging. There is not a single supermarket in the county that knows that these wipes are ruining the sewer plants.
And I can see that, but people are gonna buy baby wipes and you can't limit the sale of baby wipes to parents. I mean, that's the biggest thing,
It's
is people
different,
are
it's
using
different.
those baby wipes.
No. Baby wipes are different, adult wipes are different. It's sold different, it's packaged differently, it's marketed differently. I could bring to the next meeting here packs of wipes that is being sold in Curious Joel. There are probably
understand.
5 or 6 different models, all manufactured by people that market in the community, the broader community.
I just find it, to force someone to do it, to mandate it, it's, I don't know how you would enforce it.
It's similar to mandating to industrial waste that they can't produce X, Y, Z. You have many mandates now on what could be flushed down the toilet.
So I believe the current sewer use law prohibits flushing wipes. And people can use wipes, they just need to go in the garbage, not in the toilet. And the problem, I think, that Mr. Suckerton is bringing up is that the wipes say right on them flushable. And this is one of those, just because you can does not mean you should, kind of situations. But there is a public education component to this, to be sure. Like I said, we do a lot of these campaigns. We have all kinds of cute logos and things about this. In one community, they actually got a grant and they gave everyone a little disposal, like a flip top disposal, and if you came to a certain location, you could get this cute little garbage disposal kind of operation to put in your powder room. So you encourage that. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but it's a complicated issue and it's not just here, it's everywhere.
Wouldn't it be more on the level of a state or federal law to change it, a packaging from saying something? Isn't that under like FDA or something along those lines?
Really depends on what the product is. I don't think in this instance, we're really suggesting a total ban on wipes.
No, changing the packaging labels instead of it saying flushable, not.
It's a false message on it, that it's flushable, it's not.
It's flushable because it's gonna get out of your system.
Exactly, that's the problem,
not
right,
flushable.
Listen, unless you live on a septic system, then you
Right.
really don't want to flush those things.
Absolutely.
All right, I think we're gonna move on.
Yeah.
But before we do it, I'd like to, Kelly, can you let the record show that Senior Assistant County Attorney Joe Mahoney has joined us? And with that, Mary Beth, do you have anything else?
I do, not on total dissolved solids, if everybody's happy with total dissolved solids. Now we have, this is maybe a little more complicated, discussion. So, good, can we just have you take a pass,
Take
please?
one and pass it back.
There you go, it's just like school. Actually,
This is the second.
yeah, it's just the same thing, I just had an extra copy.
Here's another one.
So this is really our next topic, so this is the environmental impact statement.
Yeah.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you, Lori. You gave me through.
There's one for.
So folks may recall that we're in the process of doing an environmental review for the upgrade and expansion of the Harriman treatment plant, and the interceptor sewers are owned by the county. Where we're at in that process, a long time ago, we issued something called a positive declaration, meaning that we were going to conduct an environmental review using an environmental impact statement. We then conducted scoping, which was to put a framework around and look at the issues, to focus on the things that are important relative to the project. We've since been preparing a draft environmental impact statement. Folks may remember that happened over the winter time. We then sent that draft environmental impact statement out to involved agencies and the public for review. We had a written comment period that extended into April. We had a public hearing at the end of March that actually did not have any oral public comments. So we are now at a point in the process where we're preparing something called a final environmental impact statement. So the prior one was a draft. This one's the final environmental impact statement, and the cover sheet that you have here describes what the secret regulations tell us is supposed to be in a final environmental impact statement. There's a little review of next steps, and then I did include what are the contents of something called findings. That's the last step in the secret process. And then attached to it are the responses to the comments that were received. So briefly, I'd like to go over what's in a final environmental impact statement, which is on that cover sheet. So the draft environmental impact statement, either directly, so remember it was a couple of very large books, or incorporated by reference. I've spoken to county attorney's office and their preferences that we incorporate by reference rather than recreate the entire document. Any revisions or supplements to that document. We also need to include copies or a summary of substantive comments received and their source. Those are comments in writing, which all the comments we received were in writing, or hearing testimony. We do, for those who were at the hearing, we do have a transcript, a written transcript of the hearing. We will include it, although there were no comments made, but we will include the hearing transcript. And then the lead agency, and that's the legislature. Lead agency's response to all substantive comments. A couple of other notes on the final environmental impact statement. The lead agency, so the legislature, is responsible for the adequacy and accuracy of that document. And all substantive revisions or supplements to the draft environmental impact statement must be specifically indicated and identified in the final environmental impact statement. So as we go through the document attached, you can see there's a lot of references to say, that says see section 6, page 64, there's a lot of very specific references. That's to comply with this requirement. So really quickly, we'll go through the document, but where do we go from here? Depending on where you all are today, I put some dates with question marks in here because we may change this, but would be for this advisory committee to review this FEIS, this text. This is the text. There would be some attachments, but this is the text. If these documents are acceptable to the committee following our prior process, we would refer this to fiscal services. Fiscal services would review, refer it to the legislature, and the legislature would take action on that. I did give kind of the next dates of everything, but obviously if more time is needed, this could roll back a month or whatever the appropriate amount of time is. And then we lead to the conclusion of the secret process, which it might sound like a final environmental impact statement should be the conclusion, but really there's one more step, and that's doing something called issuing findings. And you can think of findings as documenting the process that was undertaken, and then describing the impacts, the potential impacts of the project and the mitigation measures that would need to be implemented for the project to move forward and for other agencies in either undertaking funding or approving the project to consider. So I've also included what's required in findings on the very end. I think we won't necessarily spend a lot of time on that today because we're not issuing findings. We're focused on FEIS. But with that, unless folks have questions on process, I think we can jump into the comments. So we received comments from the New York State DEC. We received comments from the Village of Chester through their engineer. And we received comments from the Village of Caristol and Town of Palm Tree. Those were all of the written comments that we received. You'll see that in each case here, we've actually retyped the question that was asked, and then we provided a response in bold and italic for every single comment. The exception to that is some of the comments from Caristol and Palm Tree were very lengthy. Some of the questions were lengthy. There was a lot of background information. We will be including an entire copy of all of the full record of comments. For the purposes of this discussion, we summarized, right? There was many of those questions and comments in that letter where there was a lot of background and then there was an actual question. We put the question. So with that, I think we should walk through these. There's quite a few of them. We won't go through every single one in detail unless people have questions, but for the DEC's comments, were largely what we'll call permitting and regulatory. So DEC acknowledges that they already have a request for variance, which you all are aware of pending before them right now, and that they've chosen to treat that as a modification to the permit. They've also noted that any other, that the variance runs with the permit, which we knew, and that any subsequent request would require a new variance, which we also acknowledge. So we simply state that we acknowledge that. They've also noted that we would need a new permit to increase the capacity of the plant, a new variance application if that's the method of compliance that's chosen, and the DEC has engineering plan review and approval as part of their authority and jurisdiction. We acknowledge that, and then we also pointed out where in the environmental impact statement we recognize that it's table 3.1. DEC then goes on to talk about its other jurisdiction with respect to this, and I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but they are water withdrawal, speedies permits for construction and stormwater, and protection of waters, stream disturbance should there be any disturbance of the bed or banks of the Ramapo River. We acknowledge all of these, they're all in the environmental impact statement and acknowledged there. So so that those are the responses to DEC's comments. Does anybody have questions regarding DEC's comments or the responses?
What's your take?
It was a very focused letter, and it was pretty much what we expected. They outlined their jurisdiction. You know, they don't make value judgments about environmental reviews. That's not their job. So
Not angry?
No. These are an exact copy of their comments.
You've seen many of these.
No, this is very standard
Right direction.
stuff. Exactly.
That's all, sorry.
Supposed to come open music.
Yes, it was very straightforward from our perspective.
And this is coming straight from the written comments and the verbatim, but there's no questions at the public hearing.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's not much that we could change in here at all.
Well, you can. We should discuss, and I'll go through some of these other ones. I just want to point out some of the highlights. It's 25 pages here. We won't go through every single one, but the responses, everything that's in bold and italics, we wrote, and it went to staff to review and to legal. So
Which one is that?
for every single question, which is sort of the numerical, the words that are in bold and italic underneath it, we wrote those comments.
Yeah, that's your,
Staff has reviewed them, legal has reviewed them and commented on them, but so it's really, this is what, you know, staff, us, legal are saying, these are the responses to these, but you eventually, you know, that's my point in kind of that the legislature is gonna own this documentation. You are all legislators, so you need to be comfortable with what is said here. Again, maybe I won't go through every single one of these, some of them are very technical, but I kind of want to hit some of the big picture highlights, just so that you're aware of what those responses, what the comments were and what those responses were, if that makes sense. So the Village of Chester's comments, they had 3. They asked about how sewer capacity will be allocated. The Village of Curious Joel, Town of Palm Tree also asked the same question several different times. You know, the response in all of those questions is the same, which is that the operations of the district are governed by law and regulation, local laws and policies, as well as, you know, with regard to the allocation of sewer. So the district's gonna follow laws and the policies and the existing practices that are in place or any modifications to those. So that's really the answer to that. Similarly, question about costs of the project, how those will be allocated. That's also asked several times in different ways in the comment letter from the Village of Curious Joel, Town of Palm Tree. And the draft environmental impact statement includes a section on governance that discusses cost impact and acknowledges that there is a current method of assessment, discusses the county law that governs and that was used to create the sewer district in the first place, and as well as the intermunicipal agreements that are in place that discuss the assessment of costs. So that's acknowledged in the environmental impact statement. And then last question, again, this was also a question that was asked in the Village of Curious Joel's comments, was regarding the existing intermunicipal agreements. And the question is, would they be updated or changed? The proposed action as described does not include an update to the intermunicipal agreements, although that may be conducted by the parties as necessary. So that's the response there. So those were the questions from the Village of Chester. And also some of the same questions from the Village of Curious Joel. So moving on to those questions from the Village of Curious Joel and the Town of Palm Tree, which are the comments that run they're the balance of the questions. So the rest of the questions in the document all came from the Village of Curious Joel, Town of Palm Tree. And again, there's a lot of background information in the actual question. And then these are in the document that was submitted, and then these are the questions that were asked. So the first one is regarding including copies of decisions and orders, previous decisions and orders. The response is that those were not part of the scoping document, and that the goal of this project is to kind of focus on the things that are relevant to this particular project, as opposed to sort of past issues and things that may, that would not further inform the environmental impacts of this project. Related comment here is that there were prior court decisions and previous environmental reviews that required study of future needs, determination that first and foremost, the district users are required to be served. The EIS in Appendix E and Section 2.1.3 discusses in detail capacity expansion and those future needs. You may remember we had a chart, we had reached out to all the communities. So that's incorporated in Table 2.5, and the EIS does summarize those demands. So that meets the intent of the, so that question is really answered there. There's a follow-on question which has to do with the current lack of capacity. And we did document the existing conditions in the environmental impact statement. And then I won't go into length, but it's in like 10 different places that it's there. There was a further question regarding moratorium. And I'll just read this section because this is important. It says, presently, there is no need for a moratorium. Further, the purpose of this environmental review is to assess and mitigate the impacts of the upgrade and expansion of conveyance and treatment capacity. This environmental review is not a vehicle to address a perceived need for mitigation as to existing conditions, but only to identify those existing conditions, which has been accomplished as outlined in the preceding paragraph. Moreover, even if a moratorium were to be considered, such an action would be separate from this review as an independent from this project and is not subject to environmental review. And then county legal staff provided the reference to state law with respect to that. This question also asked about maintaining existing wastewater treatment plant capability during construction, and the EIS, as you see, there's a reference there to a section of the EIS that describes how that would be conducted, and then there's additional information in the facility plan that's an attachment to the EIS regarding that. There was also a request in this question about limiting the use of capacity for out-of-district users. That's not part of this project. That's an administrative day-to-day operations and governance, not part of a capital project. So it's not relevant to identifying the potential environmental impacts or mitigation of this project. And then there was an additional question here regarding the need to implement improvements in the collection system and whether those improvements were only benefiting outside users or inside users with respect to the district. The reality is all of the discussion and all of the recommendations regarding improving the collection system, those are all collection system lines that are owned by the Orange County Sewer District #1, and that convey a combination of in-district and out-of-district property wastewater. So there isn't really a way to sort of an indivisible public good. And so that I think covers that one. And again, a lot of these questions are kind of long and complex. Again, there's a request here, question. Address how the county will provide capacity in the period in between now and when the upgrade is available. Again, the environmental impact statement does address that in several different sections. And it is noted that during construction, we may very well need to to provide a notice to the DEC of something called anticipated noncompliance for bypassing of a permitted treatment unit, because again, if you remember, trains 1 and trains 2 are gonna be replaced with a brand new wastewater treatment plant. So during that process, there's gonna be some time where we may need some relief from the speedies permit, but the state has a process in place for that to happen, and you'll see that there's a reference to the section of code for that. The next question is question 4. It's on the bottom of page 6, requests how the district intends to enforce maintenance requirements. Again, this is an operational matter. This is not a matter with respect to this capital project, so it's not relevant to the environmental review. Similarly, question 5 has to do with the county's legal obligations for service. Again, that's an operation and maintenance matter and not relative to the capital project. There's a request here in question 6 on page 7 regarding New York State DEC soliciting for comments. DEC did provide comments, as we already reviewed, and we did respond to those comments and include them here in this FEIS, as you heard a few minutes ago. Question 7 talks about a full analysis of the preferred alternative in the event that the variance is not issued, with the same level of detail as the preferred solution that relies on the variance. And the response here is that the preparation of a draft environmental impact statement is governed by the seeker regulations as well as a seeker handbook. We would direct everyone's attention to Chapter 5, Section C of the seeker handbook, which provides guidance regarding how alternatives are to be evaluated. And we'll note that the environmental impact statement as it's prepared does comply with those regulations. Comments, specific comments, executive summary, bottom of page 7 I am on. DEIS should address whether standard land use planning metrics apply equally to all of the communities. The DEIS does describe existing conditions as well as projected sewer demands in a number of different locations, and because those were all generated by the communities, they definitely take into account what the communities believe their the differences are between them. The DEIS should address, this is question number 3 on page 6. I'm sorry, page 8. Cruising right through here, page 8. DEIS should consider whether it is appropriate for the project to include upgrades to accommodate out-of-district communities. We'll just note that all of the collection system infrastructure is all operated and maintained by the county sewer districts. There's no part of this project that's happening with respect to infrastructure that is not owned by the county, and that the interceptor sewers convey wastewater necessarily from in-district and out-of-district properties. So there isn't a way to divide that out. The DEIS should clarify whether tankage will be designed and constructed above flood elevation. This is a long response, but essentially that is discussed in the environmental impact statement and all applicable regulations that followed. Another technical question regarding residuals handling. So there's a technical description here regarding the approach to this. Essentially, residuals handling is right now it has a bottleneck, and it could use a reconfiguration, and that reconfiguration is proposed as part of the project. There's a request here, and this is an important one for this group, regarding the variance, asking for additional information regarding the variance for the larger plant. And this is another request another response that I'd like to read out loud. So the question is, the DEIS should provide the details of the variance being requested. For example, is it for a total or partial relief of limits for total dissolved solids and chloride? And address in greater detail what would occur in the event such a variance is denied. Since there is no variance at this time, the DEIS should analyze the no variance alternative at a greater level of detail. The response is, to be clear, variance cannot be applied for in advance of engaging in regular activity for which a variance is sought. Therefore, there cannot at this time be a variance for water quality-based effluent standards for a 9 MGD wastewater treatment plant, as the speedies permit application for such an activity has not yet been submitted to the New York State DEC. As described in section 3 of the DEIS, the speedies modification and variance request will be submitted as part of the permitting of the project. As with any statewide variance for water quality, effluent limits for mercury, An interim limit will be established and listed in the speedies permit for the facility, and a minimization plan for those constituents for which the variance has been issued will be required to be developed and implemented. This is outlined, and then it describes which section of the EIS, and that's the total zones minimization plan we just reviewed. The EIS analyzes alternatives that do not require a variance, in the alternative section, specifically 6.1 and 6.6. So we're on page 10, existing conditions. There's a question regarding the application of the total dissolved solid and chloride regulations to an increased permit. And essentially, those same 500 milligrams per liter and 250 milligrams per liter for total dissolved solid and chloride respectively will apply to a larger permit. And there would be an arithmetic formula, the same one that's used today, would be used to figure out how many pounds on a daily max and an average monthly basis would be permitted. There's a request that the DEIS should clarify the existing deficiencies. There are several sections that do in great detail describe the existing facilities and their deficiencies. And then the key here is that the detailed analysis includes a review of hydraulic and organic capacity. The Huron wastewater treatment plant, its current configuration is rated to accept and treat annual average day flow of 5.2 mgd, maximum 30 day of 6.3 and peak hour of 12.9. The system is generally limited by hydraulics, meaning the volume of water that gets to the system. It experiences peak hydraulic flows in excess of 12.9 during wet weather events. The existing system has sufficient capacity under current average day and permitted maximum month daily flow. Longevity, there's a question here regarding should address the viability of the longevity option, given that it is obligated to provide treatment. This answer is that the longevity alternative, which is section 6.2 of the DEIS, simply extends the useful life of the existing facilities, does not comply with the current speedies permit, and does not provide additional treatment capacity. So it is not the recommended alternative, because if we remember, there are three purposes to this project: regulatory compliance, address aging infrastructure, and create capacity. So it's missing out on a couple of those, and that's why it's not detailed in any more detail than it is. Capacity expansion, DEIS must assess a detailed plan for potential sale or other provision of sewer capacity to out-of-district users. Again, this is an operational issue. It's not a capital project issue, so it's not covered in this environmental impact statement. Similar question in terms of operational is that the county should consider revising the standard assessment method. That is also an operational consideration, not a capital project consideration, so it's not included in this project. Not to say that it shouldn't be addressed, it's just not part of this project. There's a statement that the county has an obligation to meet the demands of sewer users. The comment requests that this statement and all others like it should be revised to reflect the county's primary obligation to meet the demands of its in-district users. And the response is the subject of the DEIS is improvement to the Orange County Sewer District #1 sewer system to address aging infrastructure, regulatory requirements, and increasing demands for sewage conveyance and treatment. Information regarding operations of the district is not relevant to identifying the potential environmental impacts and mitigation measures associated with the project. So again, that's an operational issue. County should clarify where surcharging infrastructures are located. The Appendix D hydraulic report, as well as section 2.1.3 of the environmental impact statement, do describe in detail, and the rest of the balance of this description is where those hydraulic restrictions are happening. So that is all addressed in the environmental impact statement. On page 13, question 13, county should acknowledge the urgency of I&I and discuss appropriate mitigation measures by out-of-district users. I&I is discussed in numerous sections, and those are listed here, and discusses the need for mitigation. A footnote to this one is obviously out-of-district users have their own obligation to this. And again, that's outside of the part of the IMA that the county has, but it's outside of the scope of this project. County should explain why it chose to examine the total build-out capacity of 16 MGD in its analysis of the SBR instead of the noted 20. And the DEIS should identify the triggers for further expansion of Harriman beyond 9. So alternative 6.5 in the DEIS, there's 2 of those, do conceptualize a 16 MGD plant, and that is in the footprint of the aging treatment trains 1 and 2. Those are the ones from the 1970s. To increase to 20 MGD, the newest existing train, the one that was recently constructed, would also have to be substantially reconstructed. Given that the land base for trains 1 and 2 can accommodate the 16 MGD and the unknown future timing of any expansion that would involve inventory, assessing this alternative presently when there's a good likelihood that future conditions will change, will be different, would be speculative and would not provide useful fact-based information regarding significant environmental impacts. So really what this is saying is when you get there, at some point in the future, you will be conducting an environmental review of that project as well. And then the question regarding what triggers there are for capacity expansion, while there may be triggers from an operational standpoint that again, the county will have in its local regulations or in other municipal agreements or other things. From a purely regulatory standpoint, there's a reference here to the section of New York Code that discusses how and when publicly owned treatment works, that's what the OTW stands for, would have to design, plan, and make improvements to their systems. And comment 14 addresses that there are a couple of headings that are incomplete in the table, and that is actually correct. Those headings did not come out correctly in the copy, so those will be corrected. I'm on page 14 at the bottom, question 15. The DEIS should acknowledge and discuss I&I issues. Again, this is acknowledged and discussed in a number of different locations in the environmental impact statement, and those are referenced here. The next question question 16 has to do with the membrane bioreactor NBR as opposed to the SBR sequencing biological reactor, sequencing batch reactor, I'm sorry. These are equally analyzed in the environmental impact statement, and they both would provide the capacity that's required. Question 17 states that it may not be the most suitable. The SBR, which is the recommended alternative, may not be the most suitable because the other alternative would provide an additional filtration step that would be required if we need to have reverse osmosis here in the system. The draft environmental impact statement does acknowledge that the SBR does not provide that ultrafiltration precursor to RO treatment. So it does describe that, and it also assesses the ability to expand both beyond that. So that's acknowledged that that's a difference in the technologies. And there's a comment here, and this is a good comment regarding the capital costs that are in the environmental impact statement. It says their 2022 capital costs are actually projected to 2025. However, given that we're in the middle of 2024 right now, finishing environmental impact statement, we would still have permitting, design, and bidding to go before we get contractor costs. We acknowledge that there will be likely the need to change those costs. The EIS does describe that and also discusses that County Law 5A provides a process through which the disclosure of those costs to the user of the system must occur. And as is typical with any large construction project, there will be multiple cost estimates made at milestones along the way. It's our understanding that the county is going to be engaging with the construction manager. And generally speaking, the way that that works is that there's the engineer and the construction manager both provide estimates and ensure that those figures are being put into design proceeds. This is chapter 4.2 groundwater resources in the bottom of page 15. DEIS should acknowledge that the connection to the New York City aqueduct will increase interbasin transfer of water into the Ramapo River Basin, increasing flow within the receiving water body. You may recall the issue here is that the Ramapo River Basin, where the Harriman plant discharges, is very close to the headwaters. So the Harriman plant does not get any benefit of dilution factor when we're considering the treatment that's required for the water. And I'll just read through this one. It's not very long. DEIS section 4.2.2 to 4.2.3 and 4.3.3 acknowledge the potential of some sewer users receiving Potable water from the New York City aqueduct may have a positive effect with respect to TDS and chloride in the influent to and thus the effluent from the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. However, it is not corollary that the flow to the Ramapo will increase as a result of changing one source to the other. Flow of the Ramapo would only change if there were an increase in overall flow rather than just an exchange of source water. Additionally, Ramapo has been determined to be wastewater dominant in the area of the outfalls of the Harriman wastewater treatment plant. And as such, no dilution or waste to similar capacity is considered in the speedies permitting process. Simply increasing the flow to the wastewater treatment plant regardless of water source does not address the wastewater dominant nature of the upper Ramapo. Moreover, the timing consequences of this interbasin transfer are not within the scope of the CIS. So even if we get more water, arguably it would be better for the Ramapo, but it wouldn't change the permitting scheme. It would just be more wastewater. We're almost done with this, I promise. Chapter 4.3, surface water sources, figure 12 is not legible. It's a FEMA firm map, so that's a floodplain map. When you look at it in the print version, it is a little hard to see because we use their actual map. If you look at it in the digital version, you can zoom in and you can see where the Harriman plant is relative to the flood zones. If that's important, we can clean that up. But it is visible when you look at it digitally. DEIS refers to non-treated water and non-filtered water. And then the question wants to address if DEC would permit the use of side stream treatment and mixing for total dissolved solids and chloride removal in the Ramapo River watershed. And then it's asking for examples. The response goes on to describe sort of the technical matters of how the proposed potential RO system would work. It's just noted that DEC issues comments on engineering reports and plans on a permit on a case-by-case basis, and they would certainly be expected to do so here. Examples of other situations aren't really relevant. We acknowledge that this would be the first of its kind in the state, other than the mercury minimization, mercury variance that exists. Top of page 17, question 21. If the county is forced to provide ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis, it should further investigate the feasibility of Hudson River discharge. DEIS should also address whether MBR is the most desirable alternative. The DEIS does provide all of these alternatives as analysis in the document, so no further alternatives analysis is necessary. DEIS should address whether there are land acquisition options adjacent to the plant, how the county plans to accommodate this. So all of the expansion options do not require land acquisition. If a variance is not issued for the expanded wastewater treatment plant, the DEIS outlines a number of alternatives that may or may not require land acquisition. And the extent of that land acquisition has been noted as much as you can at this point. It would be speculation to conduct an additional analysis. There's a technical question regarding the generation of reject water from the reverse osmosis system, and there is a corresponding technical answer to that. All of that is described in the environmental impact statement on the top of page 18. DEIS should clarify the basis for the cost of trucking, and this had to do with, you may remember, we talked about having to haul a lot of brine off of the Harriman site if we put in RO. Just quickly, we calculated the volume, we used existing we used mileage to a potential disposal site that we know could accept it, and we used the current cost of hauling. If this ever came to pass, you would have to evaluate that in the future. There isn't a good way to assess what that could be 4 or 5 years down the road. The DEIS should clarify whether the $96 million capital cost represents only the UFRO portion of this solution. The answer is yes, that $96 million is the capital cost of the UFRO, and that is projected out to 2025 costs. And this goes on to describe where that information can be found in the EIS. The DEIS should consider reuse of brine for roadway salt. This is actually a conversation we just had this morning, a little while ago, as costs associated with disposal are prohibitive. And so the response is that an evaluation of reuse of RO reject brine as a road salt is not within this scope because we're not proposing RO. However, in the future, if an RO system is considered for compliance with SPEE's permit limits, a detailed analysis of the constituents of the brine, including but not limited to actual quantity of chloride and other total dissolved solids would be required. Just a side note, brine manufactured specifically for use in road salt often also includes sodium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, and may also include other things to make it more effective. It is possible that RO reject water alone may not be ideal for use as road salt, and additional processing or additives would be required, which could obviate some or all of the economic benefits. So that would have to be evaluated at the time if it ever came to pass. Question 27 on page 19, the DEIS to clarify how costs are assessed. Again, this is the costs are acknowledged that they are going to be assessed against users. And additionally, this is an operational impact, and that the county will have to, under the county law 5A process, disclose those costs to users so that they are aware of them. And as design advances, cost estimates will be prepared as a standard practice for large scale capital projects of this nature. The next question asks about how costs will be allocated. And again, that is an operational matter. It's discussed in governance. There's really nothing more to cover. It doesn't address environmental impacts. DEIS should address the status and enforcement of programs. And question 29 had to do with I&I. Enforcement actions. Again, this is an operational issue and is outside the scope of this capital project. Talks about, question 30 talks about the DEIS lack of analysis of overall demands of capacity originating from in-district versus out-of-district. And then there's a question regarding Appendix E contains no discussion of excess capacity being made available. Again, that's an operational matter, and the DEIS in numerous places does describe by community how much flow is considered to be currently entering the system and potentially in the future entering the system. Question 31 on the bottom of page 20, DEIS lacks discussion on efforts of OCSD to improve governance of out-of-district users. Again, that's an operational matter, not a matter for this capital project. Page 21, question 32, having to do with climate change. Again, regarding I&I, the DEIS does acknowledge I&I, and there's a discussion at length in the hydraulic capacity report regarding the effects of I&I on the sewer system. Question 33, the request of some segments of the interceptor system functioning under surcharge. County should identify the location of these surcharge areas. Those areas are all identified in the EIS and in the hydraulic capacity report. So there's a full description of what areas are under surcharge right now. County must implement upstream I&I simultaneously. Again, we agree that's acknowledged in the EIS, but it's not part of this capital project. Chapter 5, unavoidable impacts. This is question 35 on page 22. The DEIS should expand on ongoing measures, and this again has to do with I&I. That is described to the extent required by this environmental review in DEIS in the sections noted and in the hydraulic capacity report. Chapter 6, alternatives, question 36, alternatives studied in the DEIS appear to be neither reasonable nor feasible because they rely on the county's receipt of a DEC variance that has not been granted. The response is that while the preferred project includes a variance for water quality based affluent limits, several alternatives do not rely on a variance. So the alternatives are both reasonable and feasible. There's a question here, 37, regarding the no action alternative. It says the DEIS should acknowledge the dwindling remaining available capacity at Harriman and restate the county's obligation to ensure there's adequate treatment capacity for all in-district users above all else. Section 6.1 specifically acknowledges the obligation to meet user demands, and there's a description in detail regarding that. And it's important to note that the contours of these obligations depend on a variety of factors, including legal and factual matters. Chapter 6.2, DEIS should acknowledge dwindling, oh, did I read that one? It does seem like it. It does, it's the same one. I'll have to double check that. So that's question 38. Question 39, DEIS should identify I&I mitigation as part of longevity improvements, including measures aimed at out-of-district users. I&I, again, is an ongoing obligation of all species permittees. It's an operational matter and it's not part of this capital project. Question 40 has to do with some technical matters regarding something called the Modified Ludwig-Ettinger process, or MLE process, versus something called IFAS. Should clarify whether the oxidation ditch tanks would be removed. And there's a technical answer here that describes where in the DEIS this information can be found. And also there's a discussion about the nature, the way that the concept plans can be viewed. They're intended to be looked at together with the narrative. They are complex, and that's because it's a complex project. Question 41, the reverse osmosis option in chapter 6.4. This alternative should be more fully analyzed, given that it is the preferred alternative in the event the variance is not issued. This alternative and all of the others are evaluated as they are required to be. It's important to note that there is no preferred alternative if a variance is denied. Preparation of the DEIS is governed by these reference standards, and the DEIS does meet those standards. Question 42, county should consider whether this would be the best option in the event of a variance, and that would be the membrane bioreactor as opposed to the sequencing reactor. We do acknowledge, again, this is repetitive of a prior question, that the sequencing batch reactor does not include that extra filtration step that would be required for reverse osmosis. However, as we just stated, reverse osmosis is not necessarily the preferred alternative if a variance is not issued. There are a number of different options that could meet the county's objectives of addressing aging infrastructure, regulatory compliance, and capacity. Question 43, the county should address whether dilution method, and this has to do again with the reverse osmosis, wouldn't treat all of the water, would treat some of the water, is acceptable to DEC. It's noted that DEC will not opine on these types of issues unless we've actually submitted engineering reports and plans for them to review, and we would expect that to be the case if this ever came to pass. Almost done. Question 44, the alternative to create a new wastewater treatment plant, new 9.0 MGD wastewater treatment plant at the Hudson River was ignored in the environmental impact statement. It's quotes to say the alternative ignores a simpler option to pipe treated effluent from the existing wastewater treatment plant versus a transmission main and a brand new plant on the Hudson. This option of pumping wastewater from the existing Harriman wastewater treatment plant to a new outfall on the Hudson would violate federal anti-backsliding legislation. Regulations embodied in Section 402 of the Clean Water Act would not be permitted. And then the final question is regarding satellite municipality diversion of 3.0 MGD to the Budna Creek. The question is, the district has no obligation to address or identify options for waste of out-of-district communities. This alternative should be removed. And the response is that the Orange County Sewer District has obligations as outlined in governing law and intermunicipal agreements. Therefore, this alternative is appropriate consideration among others. So that was a lot.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth. That was a great in-depth explanation for all the comments. And I just want to open it up to see if anyone has any questions regarding that.
You know, I just want to say I appreciate the engineering responses to all this. I think you guys did a very good job.
Yeah, exactly.
Very thorough.
Katie?
Two quick things, one more operational wise, but speaking of operational, throughout this, and I don't know how you got through that without taking a deep breath. But anyway, there were a lot of things that you mentioned that were mentioned in the various questions that were submitted that were operational. So have we extrapolated all of that, and are we starting to work on our end to be able to address some of those things? A lot of it had to do with the governance, and Joe, you know particularly how I felt about looking at the governance and getting things moving. So I'd like to have a discussion in the near future as how we're doing with those operational things. Of course, not for today. And on this, you're projecting that this would go to physical services. So this, you would be looking for approval from this committee to move it to physical services. And we would have to, unless we have further discussion, we would have to do that today if everybody's satisfied with the presentation in order to get it on the agenda for next week's physical services. And I'll defer to Chairman Cheney on how he feels about the whole thing.
I think if
You
we
need
in
another
this,
30 days?
I think if we in this room feel comfortable with the response document that and we probably get the most invested, so I can't see holding it back. If we're ready to go and you know, at worst, committee may decide not to let it move forward, possibly to gain more time, but I think it's important to put it to the committee.
I
We have to do
concur.
I
both
agree
documents,
with-
correct?
Excuse me?
Both of these handouts, the
No.
plan
No.
and the, or just the responses?
I agree with Chairman Cheney, and again, just, it was a great explanation. I'm glad you worked us through this question by question. So I feel that we all had a good chance to understand it, and as Katie said, to look forward to what's being done now, operational and getting us prepared. So I'd like to, Lori?
Would the correct motion be to move this, the responses to fiscal services? How would we exactly, how do we need to exactly word it? I'll make that motion. So,
You still have a question?
Yeah.
So I was gonna do the same thing.
yeah, okay, so how do we?
I make a motion, we send it, now how do we say it?
Yeah, exactly. How do we exactly say that?
Well, in light of the fact that this is an advisory committee, it really just has to be a consensus of the group stating that you all feel comfortable moving this forward to physical services at this point.
Okay.
So I make a
There's no need
motion.
for
I also think we need to clarify exactly what we're doing. And this speaks to your question about these two documents. We're just talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, the FEIS, correct?
Correct.
That's it.
Correct.
All of the other things,
This is just what they had asked for when we sent in for the variance,
That's
so it's
the
not
variance.
so that's
something.
for the variance. That has nothing to
That's
do with
something
the
the
regular.
regulatory
proceeding, that's right.
That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of the whole process, but it has nothing to do with the approvals that we have to do
Okay.
by law.
I didn't know if we had.
So
to
I just
approve
wanted
this
to
and that's-
clarify what we're actually sending to physical services,
We are sending
the
the
FEIS.
Comments?
comments.
No,
The-
the FEIS.
So it's the FEIS, right? It's the final environmental impact statement. This, you go back to that kind of cover sheet, right? The final environmental impact statement so there'll be like it'll end up being a book, right? But it'll be a book that will include, it'll have a nice cover on it. It's gonna say final environmental impact statement. It's going to include this document. It'll include a sheet that references the draft environmental impact statement. And include that one correction to the table where we had the table, the labels got truncated when the table got made. And it will include a copy of all the actual physical copy of all the comments. It will be that piece of documentation, which is the final environmental impact statement that you would be moving to fiscal services.
Okay, so I make a motion that we move the FEIS from the sewer committee to refer to the fiscal services committee for their approval and processing.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
And then I sent, while we were here, I sent everybody, I found out the name of that product, it's called Magic.
Okay.
It's one copy I found was out of Poughkeepsie, who's a local distributor. I sent everybody the website in the group here, so you can look at it yourselves.
Okay.
And
We'll
it,
take-
Thank you.
it brings the road salt down to table water.
Thanks. Mary Beth, do you have anything else for us? Or are you,
So with all of that, I
We'll
will
talk it out.
create the documentation and get it to whomever I need to get it to so that it can go to be on your agenda.
Okay, so you'll just make up
You'll have
the,
that when?
When do you need it? Tomorrow?
48 hours.
That's fine. Yeah, no, we can, because again, it's this plus things we already have.
you're not changing much.
No.
Not changing anything. So, okay. And then Barry, you'll have that in time for your agenda on Thursday to go out, or did your agenda go out already?
No, it hasn't gone out. And our
And the
meeting
meeting,
isn't until Tuesday.
Oh,
A
because
week
the
from
holiday.
today.
Okay, that's right. I forgot. Okay. All right, great. If nobody has anything else, I'd like to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, okay, all in favor? Thank you, everyone. Great meeting.
thank you. Great
Moving
job,
forward.
Mary Beth.
Moving forward.